Welcome to the fourth webisode of First Edition, the all things comics, film, and pop culture web show. I'm George Aguilar, and I'd like to start the show with a discussion of my Free Comic Book Day 2014 experience. Free Comic Book Day 2014 was great. I was able to grab 10 free comics. The 10 titles I grabbed were 2000 AD, Future's End, Rocket Raccoon, Guardians of the Galaxy, V-Wars, Skyward, Grimm Fairy Tales, Armor Hunters, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and Street Fighter. Of those titles, I enjoyed DC's Future's End the most, but more on that later in the review section. I also really liked the cover art on the Street Fighter comic. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Skyward, and Rocket Raccoon were fun reads that I'd recommend for all ages. V-Wars, Guardians of the Galaxy, Future's End, Armor Hunters, Grimm Fairy Tales, and Street Fighter were also interesting reads with more mature subject matter. Lastly, 2000 AD is another anthology-styled mature title with several great stories in one from top-notch creators. This year I went to the Hastings Entertainment Store because they were running special promotions to coincide with the event. Since they were running a buy two get one free promotion, I purchased 3 copies of The Walking Dead number 115. Each one has a unique connecting cover image. I also grabbed a copy of the Image comic Morning Glories number 12, issues 2 and 4 of the Avatar comic Stitched, issues 9 and 10 of the Image comic Revival, and issue number 1 of the Vertigo comic We 3. I also had a really great experience and saw plenty of people having a good time, especially children with their parents who were grabbing comics and dressed in costumes of their favorite heroes. This event was a huge success and has been a great way to get people of all ages excited for the comic book medium. I've also heard that there are plans for a biannual Free Comic Book Day, so if that should happen, all the better. Can't wait for next year's Free Comic Book Day. In comics, film, and pop culture news, the Bat Celebration has begun. To celebrate Batman's 75th anniversary, DC Comics has proudly announced its plans for Batman Day. A free special edition copy of Detective Comics number 27 will be available along with other goodies such as a Batman poster highlighting events from Batman's 75 years of crime fighting, among many other items. This special edition of Detective Comics number 27 will host an army of creators as vast as the Bat family itself and includes contributions from legendary Batman creators Gil Kane and Bill Finger, along with many others. DC is also launching 2 titles to coincide with the event, which include Robin Rises Omega and Grayson number 1. Be sure to check and see if your local comics venue will be participating in the event this July 23, 2014. And it was announced that legendary comics creator Alan Moore is diving headfirst into the digital comics medium with the creation of Elektra Comics. This digital platform will offer anthology comics and stories from Moore and other top creators such as Garth Ennis, Peter Hogan, and many others. Like all of Moore's past endeavors, he looks to continue pushing the limits of the comics medium, but this time on the digital front. Elektra Comics will also serve as a toolkit for creators to publish digitally. His first work on Elektra Comics will be a title called Big Nemo. It's unclear when the Elektra Comics digital platform will launch, but look for it to happen in the near future. In other comics news, Spider-Man is joining the X-Men. No, not Peter Parker, but Miles Morales. It was announced that the Ultimate Spider-Man will be joining the cast of the all-new X-Men. Morales is the current Spider-Man of the Ultimate Universe and has become a fan favorite with a huge fan base. It's unknown how Morales will come to the 616 or main Marvel Universe, or how long he'll stay, but with its large fan base and the fact that the writer of Ultimate Spider-Man is also the writer of all new X-Men, it's a good chance he may be here to stay. In Star Wars news, it was announced that Josh Trank would direct an unannounced upcoming Star Wars standalone film. Trank is known for his work directing the film Chronicle and the upcoming Fantastic Four reboot from Fox. He joins Gareth Edwards, director of 2014's Godzilla film, who was previously announced to direct a Star Wars standalone film. My top 3 wish lists for any standalone films would be 1. A sci-fi western starring Boba Fett, 2. A Chewie and Han Solo adventure, and 3. A young Yoda adventure. Just have to wait and see, as Star Wars news is in high gear in anticipation of the upcoming Star Wars Episode 7, which is slated for a December 18, 2015 release. Also, Marvel's Ant-Man has been dealt a terrible blow when it was announced that director Edgar Wright left the project. I'm a big fan of the director who brought us the films Shaun of the Dead and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, among many others. It appears that the break came after rewrites commissioned by the film producers caused Wright to leave over creative differences. The film, which has been in development for some time, has managed to recruit director Peyton Reed to take over for Wright. Reed is known for comedic films and has directed Bring It On, The Breakup, as well as several episodes of the Fox comedy New Girl. Ant-Man stars Paul Rudd and opens in theaters July 17, 2015. In honor of the new film X-Men Days of Future Past, here is a ton of X-Men related news, and later in the show, I'll give a full review of the latest X-Men box office adventure, as well as a very special X-Men villain themed top 5 countdown. With all of the success of the X-Men Days of Future Past film, a sequel is a certainty, and early news of the casting and development are already in high gear. Starting with the confirmation of 3 characters in the upcoming 2016 follow-up to the X-Men Days of Future Past film titled X-Men Apocalypse. Director Bryan Singer also discussed the potential inclusion of younger versions of Cyclops, Storm, and Jean Grey. He also stated that the film will take place in the early 80s, but also hinted about continuing with a time/reality altering element with the inclusion of a certain alternate timeline known to fans as the Age of Apocalypse. X-Men producer and writer Simon Kinberg has also discussed the scope of the film, likening it to a Roland Emmerich disaster film, and mentioning that the film will have a huge budget. This gets me excited because anyone familiar with the antagonist teased at the end of the credits knows how powerful he is, and the kind of destruction he's capable of unleashing on the world. And X-Men fans around the world were rocked by the announcement that actor Channing Tatum will not only play Gambit in the upcoming film, but will also star in his own spin-off film. Even more surprising was a revelation that Channing Tatum had wanted to play the role in X-Men Origins Wolverine, but due to a scheduling conflict with his part in G.I. Joe The Rise of Cobra, the role went to actor Taylor Kitsch. I'm cautiously optimistic about Tatum's take on the X-Men's fan-favorite Raging Cajun Gambit, but I'm really excited that the character is receiving a lot of attention, as he is one of my favorite X-Men. X-Men Apocalypse is set for a May 23, 2016 release date. And now for my review of Amazing Spider-Man 2. I really loved this film. Even though I enjoyed the first entry in the rebooted franchise, I thought this film surpassed it in every way. Amazing Spider-Man 2 returns Mark Webb to the director's chair, along with Andrew Garfield as the titular wall crawler, Emma Stone as the beautiful Gwen Stacy, and Sally Field as the steadfast Aunt May, for the second installment of the rebooted franchise. Along for the ride are newcomers to the movie franchise, Jamie Foxx as Max Dillon aka Electro, Paul Giamatti as Alexei Sisevich aka the Rhino, and Dane DeHaan as Harry Osborn, the Green Goblin. Let me begin by offering a brief overview of the film. Amazing Spider-Man 2 begins with Peter and Gwen at a crossroads in their lives and their relationship. Peter has grown into his role as Spider-Man, and this film really shows his growth from the previous film in both abilities and confidence. It also conveys a genuinely strong relationship between Peter and Gwen, which is definitely enhanced by Garfield and Stone's on-screen and off-screen chemistry. Life is moving along, but the mystery of Peter's parents' disappearance continues to haunt him. The film actually offers some resolution on this, which also leads to revelations in the film about Peter's powers and the bioengineering work his father and Norman Osborn had been working on. I think Garfield's Peter Parker Spider-Man has grown immensely from the first film. I must admit that I really didn't feel the outsider skater interpretation rang true to Peter's origins as a socially awkward science nerd. I think this time around that Garfield's confidence and swagger makes sense because Peter has grown into his role as Spider-Man and gained the confidence that we know from the character. I also love the updated version of the costume that looked just like the Ultimate Spider-Man costume. Emma Stone is even more radiant in her second turn as Gwen Stacy. She is perfect in this role, and it makes the film that much more enjoyable. Jamie Foxx's Electro is also another welcome addition to the film. While the character's motivations are a little cliche and his transformation into Electro was a little too convenient, I felt Foxx made the character engaging and an excellent antagonist to Spider-Man. I have to say that I was also blown away by the amazing visuals in the battle scenes. And speaking of new characters, Dane DeHaan's Harry Osborn was spot on. I thought DeHaan really characterized Osborn Jr. and gave fans an interesting but menacing friend and enemy to Peter Parker. I think his transformation from friend to enemy seemed a little rushed though, and a little contrived, but overall it works and definitely makes the film's climax that much more powerful. Finally, Sally Field as Aunt May has a larger role this time around and really shines in this film. Field is known for her strong performances, but I was really impressed with her scene-stealing performances in this film. My only real criticisms are that the film's climax felt a little rushed and shooed in. While it was climactic and heartfelt, I felt it was rushed, and I'm wondering if any of the sequels can top the heartbreaking climax of this film. I also felt that at times, the villains' performances felt slightly tongue-in-cheek, and none more so than Paul Giamatti's The Rhino, who just went off the wall with this part and actually made the film feel comic booky, but not in the good way. I love Giamatti, but it felt like he was overacting and was a little too over the top as a crazy Russian for me, and it definitely took away from the film. Overall, this film is a fun adventure with lots of spectacle and genuine romantic elements. The whole cast really shines, and I can't wait for future films, especially since the final credits scene teased the assembling of some of Spider-Man's deadliest enemies who are planning to bring the fight to Spider-Man in upcoming films. Next is my review of X-Men Days of Future Past. This film has grossed over $300 million globally in just its opening weekend and has met with nearly unanimous praise. But what do I think of this box office juggernaut? I think X-Men Days of Future Past was a great film that just fell short of amazing. I should start by saying that I am biased to this story because it's my favorite comic book storyline of all time. If I had to choose only one comic storyline to read until the end of my days, it would be X-Men Days of Future Past. So if you can imagine, I had my own thoughts on what I wanted from the film, so much so that I even wrote an alternate ending fan fiction of the film. That being said, I did try to be as objective as possible, but I still had some issues with the film. First, let's begin with a brief overview of the film. X-Men Days of Future Past is the story of the X-Men's last-ditch effort to prevent an apocalyptic future ruled by Sentinels from ever happening by sending an X-Men back in time to change their past. For those who might have wished for a direct comic-to-film translation, go in with an open mind. This film is a loose adaptation. X-Men Days of Future Past returns Bryan Singer to the director's chair, and the film definitely feels like Singer's first two X-Men films. Like previous X-Men films, the movie focuses on Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, James McAvoy / Patrick Stewart's Professor X, and Ian McKellen / Michael Fassbender's Magneto, with Jennifer Lawrence's Mystique taking on a more crucial role this time around. This film has a huge cast that unites two generations of X-Men film characters, including past and future versions of the characters, such as Professor X and Magneto. I was truly impressed with how well the cast were balanced. When I first read news about how huge the cast of this film was going to be, I felt that the film might collapse under its own weight. But after viewing the film, I must say, overall, the whole cast is effectively used in this film. Yes, some characters see little screen time. I'm looking at you, Colossus. But for the most part, everyone gets a chance to shine. This is definitely one of the film's strongest aspects. Let me continue with more of what worked. Just like in X-Men First Class, the strongest draw of this film is the relationship between Professor X and Magneto. I really enjoyed seeing the future versions of these characters played by Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen, who stand united, contrasting with their younger selves played by James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender. They really do justice to these characters by highlighting the deep relationship these two have. The greatest tragedy of these two characters being that they've been at odds for so long. If only they had worked together, they could have changed everything. Jackman's Wolverine is also a source of praise and criticism. We'll start with the positive first. I love Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. That works in my favor because Wolverine has the most screen time in this film. Like all the X-Men films before, except X-Men First Class, Wolverine takes center stage in this one too. He's also a source of humor in a mostly dark film. Now for the negative, which is that, like all the other X-Men films preceding this one, and excluding X-Men First Class, this is more of a Wolverine film, with the other X-Men just along for the ride. If it weren't for Professor X, Magneto, and Mystique, this film would be another Wolverine-centric X-Men film. This is a problem I've felt has plagued Fox's X-Men films since the beginning. They're called the X-Men, not the Wolverines. Of course, this is an old criticism that many fans of the source material have spoken about at length, including myself, but I've grudgingly accepted these films for what they are. Another positive for me was seeing the two generations of X-Men coming together. I especially like seeing the surviving future X-Men united. Blink, Bishop, and Sunspot were some great additions to the film. I wish I could say Colossus had more screen time, but he is more of a set piece than actual living, breathing character. As a huge Colossus fan, this left me a little disappointed. I also felt that the future timeline had some problems, and get ready because I'm about to make comparisons to the comic storyline. While watching the film, it seemed like the future X-Men were just sitting around, waiting the whole time. As a fan of the comic storyline, which I've read at least 100 times, I know that the future X-Men were also on a mission. It's a plan as desperate as sending an X-Men back in time to change the past, but they were also making a final effort to fight for their own future world. The film does not address this though, and instead focuses on Wolverine's efforts to change the past, while the future X-Men chill out instead of finding a way to take the fight to the Sentinels. For me, this was a major flaw of the film, because each time we cut to the future timeline, we saw the X-Men just sitting around, waiting for Wolverine to succeed or the Omega Sentinels to arrive and kill them all. I really think there should have been a parallel effort on part of the future X-Men to save their timeline as a contingency in case of Wolverine's failure. I think this is why the film felt somewhat disjointed. When the past and future storylines cut back and forth, because the past storyline felt like it was moving forward, while the future timeline felt almost stagnant. Also, I don't know if it bothered anyone else, but I couldn't believe that all of the future X-Men looked clean and unblemished in their uniforms, which looked brand new and never used. To put it in fan language, it looked like all of the future X-Men stepped out of their toy packaging and were never played with. You'd think you'd see some ripped costumes and extra long facial hair, but I only observed Iceman, played by Shawn Ashmore, who had facial hair or looked even remotely disheveled. In fact, other than the constant portal traveling with Blink and pesky Sentinel attacks, it actually seemed like the X-Men were living fairly comfortably. That bothered me a lot because it took away from the bleakness of the future that these X-Men were fighting so desperately to prevent. On the other hand, there were a lot of bright spots in this film. Highlights of the film included Quicksilver and Mystique. I was especially pleased with the Quicksilver moments because he was a really enjoyable part of the film. To be honest, I didn't have a lot of hope for Quicksilver in this film, given that so many other X-Men have been shortchanged with cheap cameos and non-roles just for the credits. A prime example being Jubilee and Angel. Jubilee was in the first 3 X-Men films, played by 2 different actresses, but was little more than a cameo in each. While Angel had more of a role, but his presence, while justified in the story, just felt like filler in the overall film. So I was very surprised to find that Quicksilver's appearance was justified and his character was an actual character, rather than a billboard sign saying, "Look, we threw in another mutant." Jennifer Lawrence's Mystique also deserves a lot of praise for her strong efforts in developing her Mystique character. She has an even larger role in X-Men Days of Future Past, and all of her scenes are interesting and enjoyable. This is a testament to Lawrence's acting abilities and physicality in the role. I also know there is talk of her starring in a standalone film, and if it were greenlit, I can honestly say I would be in line to watch. Overall, the film had a lot of great moments and will definitely please casual filmgoers and comic book fans alike. Without spoiling too much, I'm really happy to say the film fixed past mistakes, like the ones made in X-Men The Last Stand. As you can guess, seeds are planted for the next film, and let's just say Fox has taken a cue from Marvel by teasing the coming of a major threat to the X-Men in the teaser. If they had hoped to keep it under wraps, they would have avoided naming the next film after the villain. X-Men Apocalypse is set for a May 23, 2016 debut, and in honor of Apocalypse, I will give an overview of the Ancient Mutant and his key comic book appearances and storylines.